we are here talking to Dr. Michael Klein, one of the top 20 pioneers in family medicine research. Hi, Dr. Klein.
How are you?
Thank you very much for finding time to speak with us.
You're most welcome.
It is an honor to be able to ask you a few questions about your experience in family medicine research and to be able to benefit from your expertise and knowledge in this area. First off, congratulations on being recognized as one of the top 20 pioneers in family medicine research.
Thank you.
It's, I think, a great thing to be able to recognize people who made the discipline what it is now. And I think the great point to start with is to ask you, what about family medicine research do you find most rewarding?
Well, in my case, it was really about not being able to not do family medicine research. I mean, all of my career has been about the presentation of issues in the practice that absolutely required study. So that was true of, I mean, if I were to go through all of my research since the 1970s, that would be what holds it together. But I was very conscious of the fact as well that we were building a discipline. That at the time, people don't go into family medicine to become researchers for the most part. And so we, in the early part of family medicine, there basically weren't any family practice researchers. If you wanted to be a family medicine researcher, or rather a researcher, you would go into internal medicine but in our case, it was a new area. And family medicine was new also at that time in both Canada and the United States in the early 70s. But I remember very, very clearly something that the now deceased Martin Bass said, and he's one of the people who is honored as well posthumously. And Martin said that family practice research is an antidote to learned helplessness. And that was something that stuck with me, and that is because in those days, we felt helpless. We felt that we were not legitimate. So that was behind the kind of thing that I was doing, very consciously, that we were building a discipline, and that we were showing that the kind of research that we did emanated directly out of practice and would influence the way practice was carried out. And it had to be a good idea with a good methodology. You couldn't have a bad idea with good methodology, but that's the way it went.
Very interesting and powerful stuff about really enabling the discipline the way that it exists now, because I really think that what the researchers in family medicine are able to do now with the Research Day and all the work that's being done across the country, a lot of it is really owed to the early work that was really done by trailblazers like you. Mm-hmm. So thinking back through your experience, an interesting question that comes up is that I'm sure you've seen your share of different results. Were there any that really stuck out for you as being something really unexpected or perhaps even disappointing? And how did you deal with that?
Well, let me turn the question around. I think that I would say expected is what I would prefer to talk about. I can talk about unexpected, but I was originally exposed to midwives in Africa, in Ethiopia, where I spent a year and a half. And that was in medical school. And I saw birth being carried out without episiotomy, which is a surgical cut to expedite birth. And in North America, both in Canada and the United States, it was being done routinely. So I decided I would study it. And I have done the only randomized controlled trial of episiotomy in North America, which shows that the procedure causes all of the problems it's supposed to prevent. And what has happened as a result of that research is the episiotomy rate has gone from 60% to 12%. Just not me alone, but there are lots of people who knew that it was a bad idea, but it required a formal study to do that. And the consequence as well of that research was that severe trauma went from 4.5% to 1%. So that's the most important thing that I did. I think that, to return to your question, one of the most disappointing things is that what's happened now across the world, and not just in Canada and the United States, is that we have moved into a new era where cesarean section on demand is happening. And what we now have learned is that a very high percentage of obstetricians, most of whom are now women, are planning never to experience vaginal birth. And you can imagine what they're telling their patients. And so what they seem not to understand is that cesarean section done routinely, the way that they're doing it, as opposed to when needed, has many more negative consequences for both the mother and the baby in that pregnancy and in subsequent pregnancies. And they have learned that through faults in their training, the details of which I could tell you. But the point is that that the most disappointing thing for me, and I have studied it, is to realize that that the train has left the station, and that what they are doing and what society seems to want as well is in synchrony, even though what's happening is not good for mothers or babies.
Indeed, well, a couple of points there. First, of course, your work in episiotomy is just outstanding and a monumental study. I had the pleasure of reading through the summaries of that, and the amount of change that you were able to achieve with that work is really fantastic. And coming back to the prominence of cesarean section, we're working with some of our colleagues in Brazil, where the rate of cesarean section close to around
90%. Yeah.
So
Also in Middle Eastern countries. Yeah.
So certainly an interesting point that you make. But got me thinking, what would you say is the recipe for making sure that the research that you do does end up impacting policy and things that actually happen?
Yeah. Well, I think that, well, I'll give you another example, maybe from totally out of the area of my supposed expertise. One day, a child came into the emergency room comatose, and that child I recognize as having lead poisoning. And I knew that because I had spent time in New York in poor neighborhoods where lead poisoning was common. I was at the Montreal Children's Hospital at the time, and so I knew a lot about lead poisoning. And I was able to diagnose it while others had never been exposed to it. And I learned in a very sad story, again, right out of practice, the same kind of thing, that the mother of the child had actually created a pot, according to a pitcher, actually, according to a formula that had actually been in the back of one of the the very most commonly used handbook for potters. And so there was also, that was a 2-year-old, and then there was a 4-year-old. The 2-year-old didn't survive. The 4-year-old I was able to treat successfully. The 2-year-old died shortly after arrival in the emergency room. We were able to save the 4-year-old through the methods that I learned back in New York. But then the question was, so what's it about? So we learned, I knew nothing about pottery. So I joined forces with a potter who knew a lot. And what we learned was that the formula was wrong. But the mother was perfectly right in doing what she did. But without a lot of detail, you need to have 2 parts of silica to 1 part of lead to keep the lead in the glaze. And the formula was 1-to-1. So the next thing I did was I gave a bunch of McGill medical students $50 each, and I sent them out at Christmas time to buy pots. I never told them what it was about. I said, buy pots, anything that makes you happy. And they brought them back to me, and we tested them, and 25% of them were releasing huge amounts of lead. And then the question became, what do we do now? So what we did is, in both Canada and the United States, we talked with legislators, and we talked to the immigration authorities who were immigrating pots from all kinds of countries, and a lot of them with lead as well. We got the formulas changed in the handbooks, and we pretty much eliminated the problem in both the United States and Canada. So, that's another area completely outside of maternity care, where you just feel this compulsion to, make the change that needs to be made. So I can give you other examples outside of maternity care too.
No, it's an excellent example of how, especially coming back to the point with collaborating with a potter, that it's really through collaboration and teamwork that we're able to achieve some real and meaningful change. And thank you, that was a fascinating story. Thinking about the future upcoming cohort of young family medicine researchers, are there any lessons or advice that you would be able to impart on them based on your experience?
Well, one of the most satisfying parts of my recent career has been as head of what's called the Clinical Scholars Program at the University of British Columbia. And the purpose of that program, which I was heading for 10 years until very recently, was to help practicing family doctors realize their research questions. And so, again, their questions come directly out of practice. They're not researchers. And some of them become researchers as a result of this. And so mentoring those people to get their questions answered, and they have to be important questions. They have to be questions that will impact practice. And then we support them. We support them through mentoring. So, for example, one of my trainees just presented the best paper in the Family Practice Journal this year. Non-researcher, who showed clearly how she can improve care for the frail elderly. And that's totally outside of my area of expertise, but it certainly wasn't in terms of methodological issues, so I could help her with her methodology. So that's great, of great satisfaction. Now, even though I'm not head of that program now, I'm 71, it's about time to let somebody else run it, but I continue to be available on an individual question basis. So I'm even with family practice residents and even with midwives. I'm spending time with midwives to help them with their research questions, and both groups are wonderful to work with.
Well, that's great. I think it's very empowering that you're sort of teaching the fact that just because you don't classify yourself as a researcher does not mean that you're not doing research.
No.
Excellent.
But some of them do. I mean, we've had one who's here today who was a full-time family practitioner, and he then, in the program, got a PhD. And he now is one of the key researchers at the University of Alberta.
Very nice.
And he was a full-time family practitioner who went through the program.
Oh, that's great. So there's a lot of room to expand
Yeah,
further.
you can either continue as a family practitioner or you can morph into a researcher.
Well, or be a family medicine researcher.
Yeah, well, he is a family medicine researcher.
Fantastic. Yeah. Excellent. Well, I think these were some very interesting and fascinating points that you brought up. Are there any concluding thoughts about family medicine research and its importance that you would like to leave us with?
I don't think so. I think the most important thing is the mentoring. Being available and helping people to get their questions answered, and that the questions have to come out of your life. And if they don't come out of your life, you won't have the passion, because it's very hard work. And you have to really want the question answered, because it's going to exhaust you. You're going to have to learn things that you never learned before. And your family has to be supportive, because it's work that you'll do at nights and weekends, because you still have a practice to run. So it's very important for us to support these people, because otherwise they simply couldn't do it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for being such a mentor and offering so much of the support to the younger researchers who very much need it, helping them ask and answer these questions. Congratulations once again on being recognized as a pioneer of family medicine research, and we certainly look forward to all the future projects that perhaps you will do. Congratulations.
Okay, thanks a
Thank
lot.
you very much
Bye.
for taking the time.
You're welcome.